From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there and welcome to Chicago Newsroom on this, our holiday weekend edition of Chicago Newsroom. Merry Christmas to you, and certainly a very happy New Year, depending on when you're watching the show. We have a kind of a trip down nostalgia lane for you here today, because it was just over 50 years ago in the summer of 1968 when the hippies and the yippies and the flippies, as Mayor Daley the Elder used to like to say, when they invaded Chicago with their threats to lace our drinking water with LSD and nominate Pegasus the Pig as their presidential candidate. You remember all this. It was the Battle of Chicago, of course. And when it was over, the city went looking for a group of people they could blame for the street violence. And that's how we got Judge Julius Hoffman and the Chicago 8, or later the Chicago 7 trial. Well, there's an extraordinary document about that trial that was recently revealed to the public. It's a handwritten diary kept pretty meticulously by one of the jurors. Her name was Mrs. Fritz, and the trial had a profound impact on her thinking and really her way of looking at life. Mrs. Fritz died earlier this year at 99, and her daughter, Marjorie Fritz-Birch, decided to make a trip into her mom's basement to look around for those diaries. And what she found was truly moving and extraordinary. It's a glimpse into a time that seems like it could have been 100 years ago. So happy to have Marjorie Fritz-Birch with us today. That's along with John Holden, of course, from the Edgewater Historical Society. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And as I said, Margie, thank you very much for being here. So let's try to figure out what we have. I want to say before we even get started here that my attention got called to this because Mary Schmidt wrote such a beautiful piece in the Tribune a few weeks ago, and we'll probably be making some references to her article as we go along, and it's really worth looking up online at the Tribune if you like. So did you always know that your mom had this diaries? Did you know as a girl that she did them?
Oh, yeah. I knew I was 20 when the trial was going on, and my mom was sequestered for 5 months.
Yeah.
And as a result, I mean, at the time, during the trial, I didn't really know she was doing this journal, because we were virtually hardly allowed to speak to each other. Without marshals on the other end of the line, she wasn't allowed to come home. It was like living in a police state for 5 months.
She was actually sequestered at the Palmer House for
5 months.
5 months.
Yeah.
I don't think that's done anymore, is it? I mean,
they still have sequestered juries, but and during the trial, they were told that there was one of the longest sequestered juries in the history of the United States.
Is that right? Oh, yeah, it has to be.
And so basically, she was keeping this journal at night. They couldn't watch TV. They had no contact with the outside world. So
and unlike today, it was possible. You could actually keep people away from the world. I mean, by taking newspapers away from them.
Right. Well, now with cell phones, I don't know how they would do it, but they weren't allowed to do anything. And so she would keep this journal at night in her room. I don't remember right after the trial. I didn't read. I always knew of the journal, but I hadn't read it in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And my mom was just a couple of months short of her 100th birthday when she died, and the last year was rather difficult. She was not remembering, and it was very hard for me emotionally. So I just, I went down in the basement and found her journals again and started reading them.
But you had seen them before. You knew they
but it had been years since I had looked at them.
Yeah.
And looking at them from a different perspective for somebody my age.
Yes, absolutely.
And then reading, as I read through my mom's journals, it was like, to me, it was like I just had to keep reminding myself what she was. And
closer to the age that she was when she was a juror.
Right. Yeah. She was 51 when the trial was taking place. Yeah. I'm much older than that now, unfortunately. But it was just really wonderful for me to read through that, just to keep reminding myself what she was. And her insights and her understanding and her open-mindedness was just amazing to me as I read through her journals.
The journals are actually, all sorts of things are available up at the Edgewater Historical Society and Museum, right? And John, you know a little something about that. So let's put this into perspective with the museum and how the museum came about and why you decided to take on this exhibit.
Well, I've been a board member of the the Edgewater Historical Society and Museum for about 5.5 years now. It's a wonderful institution. We just marked our 30th anniversary. We get into all kinds of interesting activities. We sponsor not only great museum exhibits like the one on Margie's mother, but also have numerous lectures, an annual home tour, and a lot of activities to really not only celebrate the community, but try to build it up. One of the things we do each year is called the Living Treasures Award. So we really try to put a spotlight on people who are doing great things for the community and the people in the community. So it's a very robust organization. There are about a dozen community-based historical societies throughout Chicago. They're all doing great work. I think we probably do as much, if not more, than most of them. And it's all strictly volunteer effort that goes into it. In addition to the exhibit on the Chicago conspiracy trial, we also have one up right now on the legendary Edgewater Beach Hotel.
Oh, really?
Which was probably the single institution that Edgewater is most known for. That's also been gone just about 50 years now, so there's a lot of rich history in every Chicago neighborhood, but Edgewater especially.
Don't get me started. I remember standing on the edge and watching them wreck that building.
It was heartbreaking.
It was awful. And you know what was great about it was that old building, man. It just stood there. It would not give in.
It took a long time to take down.
It took them a long time to take it down.
It did.
They were hammering at that building.
They don't build them like that anymore.
That's true. So anyway, not to take away from the conversation we're having here, and John, jump in on this because you know more about this than I do, but you know, to put this into perspective, I mean, we're talking about 1968. Chicago had just gone through the riots, the Martin Luther King riots. Chicago felt like it was just teetering on the edge. And
very explosive year.
And then, of course, we have the Battle of Chicago and national TV and Walter Cronkite saying it's a police state and barbed wire and all the rest of it. So your mom, was she a sort of a politically active or politically aware person at the time that she got drawn into this?
Well, my mom lived in Edgewater for about 8 years. Through her, by the time she was 12 to 20, and she was a city. I mean, she had a very unhappy childhood, but you know, she loved living in the city. So my mom was always, even though she moved to Des Plaines when she got married, and that's where I grew up, but I'm living back in Edgewater. She was always, I mean, she was city smart, even though she was living in the suburbs. And she always voted. She was always politically aware. She was an election judge. She would do things like that. But, you know, my mom at that time, she would vote Republican, you know, I mean, she wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool liberal Democrat. She actually voted for Nixon. I used to tease her about that. And, but as a result of the trial, the day that when they were going down being chosen, she was reading a book by James Baldwin. And for a 51-year-old woman from the suburbs reading a book by James Baldwin in 1968 was kind of unusual. I mean, she always had an open mind. But as a result of the trial, because of what she went through and what she saw the government do and the unfairness and everything, the unconstitutionality and illegality of the entire thing, she became a liberal Democrat and never voted Republican again.
Oh, is that right?
Life.
So
and my dad as well.
I mean, I know that you say that the trial, and you can read it in her journal, that the trial really sort of changed her perspective on a lot of things. But that's a heck of a change to go from a Nixon voter to a liberal.
Was she? Well, you know, she was kind of moderate. She would vote both parties, but that's when Republicans were more moderate than they are now. But you know, she. Also, you know, her journal is also available online on our Facebook page and our website if people want to read her journal. But she, you know, when sitting through that trial, it was what is amazing to me how she saw through what the government was doing very quickly and how unfair the entire situation was. You know, and she was able to process that. And it also scared her. She says in her journal that she was, for the first time in her life, she was afraid of her own government.
Yeah, yeah.
And which was a scary thing to her, like with undercover agents and, you know, and everything like that. She said, what has happened to our freedom?
Well, I know she wrote, I know we need police, and I am for all of them, but I don't like people like this, and I have sure learned not to trust a lot of things. I'm getting more and more afraid for our freedom every day that I sit here.
Right.
She was being exposed every day to informants, police informants who had infiltrated these organizations, and I know she said she said a number of things about. One of the things I thought was really interesting is kind of reflecting on herself when she says, as I sit in my jury box, and she's writing this late at night, I guess, right in the hotel room afterward.
Yeah.
As I sit in my jury box seat, I wonder what the defendants are thinking. Here are 14 people who, as a whole, have not had one half of the education of any of those 7. It seems to me there could be a better way of choosing a jury.
Well, to that, she goes back to that quite frequently in her journal about her lack of education and how not one person on the jury had a college education, and they were judging people that were PhDs, were lawyers, were accomplished writers.
Yeah.
And my mom never wanted me to know, but she went to Senn High School, and she had to quit in her senior year because they were very poor and she had to go to work. She never wanted me to know that, and she never told me that until I graduated from college. And that was kind of an ongoing thing with her. And another thing she says in the journal, when I get off of this jury, I'm going to buy books and I'm going to read. And I'm not going to take anything at face value anymore. I'm going to look below the headlines. And too, it was like even from the very start during the trial when they kept applying for permits and the Daley administration was turning them down. That came down from the top. It came down from Hoover, Nixon, Mitchell, all the way down to Daley. They wanted to make an example of these people. And they wanted to create a planned violence. That was actually what they had in mind. Nobody, and John Schultz, who she gave the interview eventually to an Evergreen magazine, wrote a book called No One Was Killed. And that was the whole point. The police weren't going to kill anybody, but they were going to make an example, and they were going to create a violent situation, which they did. And my mother was able to understand that because almost 2 to 1, almost every single prosecution witness was an undercover agent. That was basically the basis of their argument. And and then of course when the defense came, it became like a circus-like atmosphere on purpose.
And I think she was really genuinely offended by that.
She was.
That some of these people really appeared to be friends of the people that they infiltrated, and then they come in and talk about all of these personal conversations they were having.
Well, there was one, I can't remember the man's name right now, that had infiltrated Abby Hoffman's group, the Yippies, in the planning for like a year before the convention started. And he came on the witness stand that day to testify against it. And that's the first time Abby Hoffman knew he was an undercover agent.
Is that right?
And he just looked at him, he said,
they did their work well.
Oh my God. And he just looked at him and said, thank you. I mean, he was like stunned. And I think that probably was one of the nights my mom wrote. She said, oh my God, how can these people live with themselves? How can they do this? How can they live with themselves? She was just really dumbfounded by all of that. And I was in college at the time too, and she wrote, she was like, God, I worry that Margie could have a roommate that's spying on her. It's like...
We had a little tiny piece of that. I was up at Northeastern at the time. That's where I went to college, and I was editor of the newspaper there. And it turned out that one of the people that we all knew really, Bill Frapley, you know that, right? Yeah, just really, and you get this weird feeling like. Wow! So how many more of us, our Red Squad?
Well, he testified for the prosecution. And
that's right. I forgot that detail, important detail.
Right.
Yes.
And my mother at one point, said something about these guys are enjoying their jobs way too much.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, within the exhibit at the museum, we have a list of all the defense and prosecution witnesses and little histories of some of them. We couldn't do all of them because there was like 53. Prosecution witnesses and over 100 defense witnesses.
So
some of whom were the who's who of intellectual America, Norman Mailer and Dick Gregory and Allen Ginsberg.
Well, that's interesting.
To have been a juror was to have a front seat to, it was like being on the Dick Cavett show in some ways.
Yeah.
It's really true.
No, it was amazing. I mean, there were writers, authors, and Jean Genet was there, and he didn't testify. Terry Southern. I mean, just amazing group of people.
Well, I love
and
the thing where she says, "I know quite a few of the jurors were horrified," talking about Allen Ginsberg, and she said, "After Allen Ginsberg's testimony at the Palmer House, we sat on the floor and tried to imitate the Om and meditate."
I know, I love that too. That was so wonderful.
If Judge Hoffman had known that, he would have had them off of that jury so fast.
Well, they did try to get my mother. They tried to get my mother off the jury.
Did they really?
Yeah, but they.
Why? What did she do?
No, it was what I did.
Oh.
It was.
Here comes the juicy part.
Yeah, right. I mean, I was only 20 years old. I had stars in my eyes. I was so naive. And Rennie Davis, it was just at the end of the prosecution had just rested their case. It was right before Christmas. And Rennie Davis came to Northern, that's where I went to school, and gave a lecture. So of course I went. And of course the place is crawling with FBI agents.
Of course.
Rennie Davis is there.
Right.
And after the lecture, I wanted to ask him a question. Oh goodness. And I stood up and I said, "My mom's on the jury." And I went, "Oh my God." I knew immediately, "Oh, Margie, what did you do?" And I got so nervous and I stumbled and I wanted to ask him if, because everybody turned around and looked at me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I wanted to ask him if he felt the prosecution had presented a valid case. Well, it came out wrong. And I mean, I don't even know what I said. I was so nervous. And it kind of came out like I had been talking to my mother, which of course, there's no way we could do that.
Right,
you know, our phone calls were monitored, our mail was opened. And as a result of that, because they had pegged my mom as a liberal juror because of the looks on her face, when Bobby Seale was bound and gagged, she was crying in the courtroom, she was shaking. They pretty much had pegged her as a dissenting juror. And as a result of that, they were going to try to get her off the trial. Now, so what they did to me, I was, oh my God, I was beside myself. I was so scared. And I could go down and watch the trial because I was a family member. I didn't have to wait in line, they would let me in. And after that happened, these marshals would pull me aside and tell me my mother was going to go to jail for 2 years and be held in contempt of court. I was scared to death. I didn't know what to do. My dad was ready to, of course, strangle me. And I was so scared. I was crying all the time. I didn't know what to do. And so one day when I was down, and so of course my mother had no idea this was going on.
Of course.
She knew something was happening, but she didn't know what. And she could tell by how upset I was when I was in the courtroom. And I couldn't talk to her. If I sent her a note, they actually read my notes and edited them when they said nothing. So one day when I was down, of course, they were all right before Christmas. I was leaving that day, and I was in the elevator, and I turned around. The elevator door closed, and Bill Kunstler and Abby Hoffman came in the elevator behind me and put their arms around me and said, "Your mother is never going to jail. They cannot get her off the trial." He said,
was this deliberate? This wasn't an accidental thing. They
no,
actually
deliberate because they knew what was going on, and they just wanted me to be assured this was never going to happen. It was hearsay.
Wow.
They could never get her off the trial. And this collective sigh of relief.
Oh,
and
that must have been an important day for you.
Well, I thought Abby Hoffman, I just loved Abby Hoffman. Anyway, he was my favorite my mom's favorite defendant also. And I had I think at that time, a big crush on Bill Kunstler. I thought he was so cool. So inevitably they could not do it. But they made my mother's life pretty miserable and made our lives miserable. And the fact that they told me things like that was just unconscionable. Right. Trying to scare me, but she won out in the end, so they weren't able to get her off the trial.
Yeah. So let's move to now 1970, right? February 13th of 1970, and she writes in her diary, "My head is just about ready to split. I have no appetite. Never will go through anything like this in my life again. There's just been no meeting of minds in the deliberating room."
Yeah.
And this is where the rubber meets the road here.
Right. Well, it was 4 women that were dissenting jurors. Mary Butler, who was a African-American woman, Frida, who was a Jewish woman, and my mom and Shirley Seaholm. The other 8 actually the other 8, as my mom wrote in her journal at one point, they wanted him guilty from day one. They didn't listen to anything. They didn't pay any attention to testimony, nothing whatsoever. And they went into the deliberation room. And she knew, I mean, at one point, excuse me, at one point she wrote in her journal that I hope we don't fight like cats and dogs in the deliberation room. And when they got in there, the other 8 were just very, very cruel to her and very mean to her, telling her she had no mind of her own because, you know, you have a daughter in college and she's a hippie and, you know, you do anything that she says. And I mean, they were just really cruel to her. And there was no way. They sent in 2 hung jury notices, and Hoffman refused them. And the marshal came in and told him, we'll keep you here as long as it takes to reach a verdict, which all of this is totally illegal. They asked for transcripts of the trial. He refused the transcripts. Mind you, this is a 5-month trial, and he refused the transcripts. So, I mean, you know, I think they were in deliberation for like 3 days, and there was just no way. It was never, it was never going, they were never going to agree. And and my mother started to be afraid if they handed in a hung jury notice that the government was so vehement about prosecuting these men that they would have a retrial. So they inevitably agreed on this compromise verdict where they were found, well, Freunds and Weiner were found innocent of all charges. The other 5 were found innocent of the conspiracy charge, but they were found guilty of crossing state lines to incite a riot, which in itself was unconstitutional.
And what the government wanted more than anything.
Yes, because that was basically put in to eradicate the Black Power movement. That's how it originally started. And it was found unconstitutional years later. So they reached this compromise verdict, and my mom was beside herself. She couldn't live with herself because it's really not anything she wanted to do. She came home that night. We had media all up and down the street. She wouldn't talk to anyone. She refused to speak to anyone. Walter Cronkite called her that night.
Is that right?
She wouldn't talk to Walter Cronkite. I said, Mom, please, please. And she would not. And she went upstairs and just broke down. And she cried and she cried. And this went on. She almost had a nervous breakdown. We had death threats. We had neighbors accusing us of being communists that they'd been friends with for years that never spoke to her, wouldn't speak to her. My dad had a Western auto store. We had customers coming in the store telling them they'll never do business again because of what my mother did. They wrote articles in the local paper against my mother. I mean, it was incredible. It was very similar to what it is now.
And
very similar.
You had a front row seat to witness this. You got to see it.
Yeah. I mean, it just you know, I quit school for a semester and went to California after the trial. And my dad took my mom to Florida to visit old friends of hers from Edgewater, actually. Because she needed to get away. And it was a life-changing experience. It truly was, and something that, you know, it was life-changing for all of us. You know, she wasn't even allowed to come home. The first time she was allowed to come home was Christmas. And we could go there like once a week and visit for 4 hours with marshals all over the place. And they let her come home at Christmas for 4 hours with a marshal. And they took her back at 1:30 in the afternoon. And she wrote in the journal at one point, she said, I just came back and just started to cry. She said, went up to my room by myself. Why can't I be home on Christmas?
Why can't I be home on Christmas?
And, you know, then after that, on Sundays, she would come home with a marshal for 4 hours. And one of the days they came home, mind you, she and my dad hadn't been together for 5 months. They went upstairs to be alone in the bedroom for a while, and this marshal's at the bottom of the stairs, hollering at them to come downstairs. I looked at him and I said, leave them alone. That's none of your business. But he wouldn't stop. You know, it was like, that was the type of atmosphere we lived in.
But the good news is that Vice President Spiro Agnew was very happy about what happened, and he heard the news. He said, I'm just quoting Mary Schmidt here, he praises the jury and calls the defendants societal misfits, and soon afterward there's a poll of Chicago Tribune readers and a majority of them approve of the results.
That was how horrible. They approved of the violence of the convention as well.
So
the police.
And then your mom actually writes, I feel like I didn't fight hard enough for what I believed, which is...
Yeah, she had a hard time living with herself, and it took... Finally, she gave an interview, she and Shirley gave an interview to John Schultz in Evergreen Magazine, which was an underground magazine at the time. And as a result of that interview, an appellate court was convened. And because she told the truth about everything that was going on, what happened in the deliberation room, and how she felt about Hoffman. She said, I felt from day one he thought these men were guilty and he was never going to be a fair judge. Yeah. And they
That's
called...
what many people in America also felt. Yeah.
And the prosecuting attorneys as well, Ferran in particular. Yeah. And so when they were called back, they called back all of the jurors and questioned the jurors. And then there was another appellate court. There was 2 appellate courts, and she was called back again. And as a result, pretty much of her testimony, and a lot of what Shirley said too, because most of the jurors wouldn't say anything, they just kept saying, I don't remember. Mm-hmm. A lot of the criminal charges were reversed as a result of those the appellate courses. And she got a letter from Studs Terkel, which is in the exhibit, telling her how brave and how proud he was of her. And and authors sent her books. People that had written books about the trial sent her copies. And she kept in touch with John Schultz. Then we have interviews with her too. That was she gave an interview to Bill Curtis years later on A&E, American Justice Series show, on the trial and the convention, and also
and almost all this material is in the exhibit.
It's all in the exhibit. And the interview she gave to Kunstler's daughters about 10 years ago. They did a documentary on their father and came and talked to her, and she gave them all of her journal and all their information for research, and then they gave it all back.
I see. Okay.
So it's all in the exhibit, and
the museum is free and open to the public every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 1 to 4.
Right, and I will willingly give private tours. They can just email me. We have we kept every newspaper article, every magazine article. We have all this archiving information. And timelines of everything that was going on.
It's an amazing collection, and that you had the force of mind to realize that you were sitting on some history and to do something with it, I think is to both of your credit. So it was still in 1972, right? Citing the judge's obvious antipathy to the defense, the appeals court reversed the conviction of the 5 men found guilty, and the government declined to retry them. So it's now 1972. Nixon is still president, but these things.
It was actually James Thompson, who our future governor, was one of the lawyers on that.
Is that right?
Yeah, and said, we are not going to retry this case. It's not worth it. So they didn't want to go through it again.
Another detail I didn't know.
Yeah.
This is an amazing story. It's an amazing family story, and I just really highly recommend. As I said, look up Mary Schmitch's thing in the Tribune. It's very easy to find.
It was the August 19th issue, Sunday
August 19th, Tribune.
You need to come and see the exhibit.
I will, I promise. And so the exhibit is running for...
It's an open-ended run, but we hope to have it running through most of 2019, which is the actual 50th anniversary of the trial itself.
Hopefully to have it up until the end of the trial.
Until the end of the trial, And the museum is located where, John?
We're at 5358 North Ashland Avenue, basically the corner of Balmoral and Ashland Avenue. We're in
that old fire station.
Old fire station. Right. We're just half a block west of the very thriving Andersonville Commercial District Strip.
Yes, you are.
Well, as I said, we're free and open to the public on Saturday and Sunday afternoons from 1 to 4, and we're also available to arrange special showings throughout the week, and anyone interested in that can contact us through the information on our website.
Well, thank you both so much for being here today. This is such a fascinating conversation about a little piece of our history, and I'm really happy you were able to be here. John Holden, thank you for being here from the Edgewater Historical Society and Museum. And we'll just tell people to go there and see it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Marjorie Fritz-Birch for being here to talk about your mother, Jean, and all the wonderful things that she was able to accomplish in her life. It's a really cool thing. Thanks for both being here.
Thank you.
You're watching Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis, and we'll be back after the holidays with Bill Daly. He's going to be our first guest after the new year here on Chicago Newsroom. And as always, you can see all of our shows by going to this address right here. See all of our own Historical Society 10 years of shows. And we'll see you next time, okay? Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.
This is Chicago Newsroom.
Chicago Newsroom continues now on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis saying Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, depending on when you're seeing our show, since it's stretching over a couple of weeks. And also, the best wishes to you for a really wonderful 2019. A couple of years ago, we went out to the Food Depository, the Chicago Food Depository, and we talked to them about what it's like to run the logistics of such a huge operation that feeds so many people every day, every month, every year. And we've since learned that the statistics in that show really haven't changed all that much. The number of people who are food vulnerable in Chicago is still about the same as it was 2 years ago. If anything, it's probably become a little worse. And we thought this would be a great time to pull that show out of the archives and watch it again. It's a very informative show, and I think it's worth seeing again. So let's roll that digital archive and see the show that we did a couple of years ago here on CAN TV. Well, hi there, and welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. Things look a little different. We'll explain in a moment. But first of all, it's that weekend, isn't it? It's that couple of weeks between New Year's and Christmas, and we want to wish you, if you haven't already had one, a very wonderful and warm Christmas and a terrific 2017. Let's hope that 2017 is, it's going to be a challenging year no matter what. We all know that, but let's hope that at least for you and for us, it's a great year, huh? For many people, though, 2016 wasn't such a great year. For almost 1 in 6 people who live in Cook County, they really didn't know at the end of the pay period whether they were going to have enough money to feed the family the way they wanted to feed the family. And this is a thing that we really want to focus on our program here today, and that's why we are where we are. Nicole Robinson, welcome to
thanks
Chicago
so much, Ken,
Newsroom. Glad to have you here. We're at the Chicago Food Depository, Greater Chicago Food Depository, which is a massive place on the southwest side. What do you do here?
Thanks, Ken, for having me. I'm Vice President of Community Impact at the Greater Chicago Food Depository, and basically what that means is I help lead our programs, strategy, and public policy, and help us connect our neighbors to food across Chicago and Cook County communities.
Now, that sounds a little formal to me, okay? That sounds like something that you'd read on an annual report or something. On a day-to-day basis, what is this connect? How do you make this connection?
Oh, thanks for asking that. So as you mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about the needs. So you're right. There are 1 in 6 of our neighbors across Cook County who face hunger. Mm-hmm. That's actually about 812,000 people, 15% of the population in Cook County. And just for context, too, 30% of that need is actually in the suburbs as well as across the city. And it's emerging in communities and neighborhoods across all of the city. So it's not just something that's isolated to 1 or 2 or 3 neighborhoods across Cook County. It's something we see popping up everywhere.
I think we really do get a kind of a sense of that. I mean, we've all heard these stories about how, you know, more and more people are working 2 jobs. They're working for minimum wage, which, as we all know, can't even begin to support a family. And, you know, we get to that point, don't we, where something has to give, and one of the things it has to give is the kind of food you can provide the family.
That's exactly right. Families are making trade-offs. Mm-hmm. It's a trade-off between, you know, paying rent and getting healthy, nutritious food. Mm-hmm. Do I pay my light bill or my heating bill, or do I have enough money to, you know, pay for my prescription as well as have the food I need to take with my medicine? So those are the kinds of trade-offs families are making. And there's a myth out there that many of the families who face hunger are homeless, but that's actually not true. Many of them are working, and 50% of them have worked at some point over the past year, and 90% of them have a place to stay. The question is, to your point, is it meaningful employment with benefits and a living wage so that they can actually afford the food that they need?
You know, I think there are going to be a bunch of times in this conversation today where I'm going to want you to say it again, because these things just kind of flow by us, you know, like a river. Mm-hmm. You just said 90% of the people who are food insecure are not homeless. They have a place to stay.
That is correct. But if you're in a 2-parent household, and you're working low-wage jobs, you may not have enough to just provide for your family. So that's part of the challenge that a family has. So it's not that people aren't working, it's that do they have that meaningful employment so that they can afford everything they need, including the nutritious food that they need. And that's where the food depository comes in, because we were set up about 37 years ago to be an emergency food system. So we weren't meant to be a permanent solution, but an emergency system. And unfortunately,
the emergency persists.
Right. The emergency has gotten more acute, particularly after the recessionary period. So that's where we are today. And what we do, we don't do this work alone. You're right. We're in this huge facility. It's about 268,000 square feet. So it is big. But what we do is collect and distribute food. And many of our donors are corporations, grocery retailers. We receive government commodities. We also purchase a fair amount of food because we're really committed to the nutritional mix of our food. 70 million pounds of food comes through this warehouse every year. It's a big number, but it's only a drop in the bucket in terms of the need. 35% of that, which we're really proud, is fresh produce, because what we've also learned is that many of the families that show up to the food pantries, kitchens, and shelters that we partner with have other health challenges, whether it's diabetes or hypertension. So we're really committed to having a great nutritional mix. Fresh fruits and vegetables, rice, beans, meat, the proteins that families need. So we're completely committed to that. But this is really the foundational work. You're sitting in the foundation of the food, but really if we're going to end hunger, it's actually our work is through partnership and collaboration across all the neighborhoods across Cook County. And that's and I want to talk to you a little bit about our strategy and how we do that.
Yeah, well, let's do that. But also, I have a feeling that people who are watching the show are thinking, where are we? Give us a sense of this. So let's look around. I mean, this is, as you say, this is what, a couple of 100,000 square feet of storage or
over 268,000 square feet.
Yeah. And at any given time, I mean, we can see that over here there are dock doors where trucks are coming in and I presume going back out. But food is being kind of just centrally moved around.
Exactly. We have a fleet of 50 trucks that pick up and distribute food across Chicago neighborhoods and Cook County neighborhoods. And this facility is where we store a lot of the food. You see a lot of shelf staple items on the racks. And if you see that white building in the corner, that's actually where the cold and refrigerated items need to be stored. Okay. So that's a key component because, as I mentioned, 35% of what we distribute are fresh food items.
Well, I want to go back to that because this is all part of a much larger story, isn't it? I mean, it's the story of America in 2015, 2020. One of the biggest problems that we have in this country is access to health care. Which maybe was starting to be resolved with some of the Obamacare stuff, but that may be going away, we just don't know. But healthcare ties into diet and ties into access to quality food. I mean, it's all part of one thing.
No, thank you so much for mentioning that, Kim, because that's that piece around the clients showing up to the pantry, soup kitchens, and shelters with other health challenges, hypertension, diabetes, and what we've been able to do most recently, our most innovative partnerships have been with healthcare providers. And one example of that is with Cook County Health and Hospital System. And what we're doing is we're meeting clients where they are, which is a foundational piece of our work to connect with communities. So we are the medical staff at the Cook County Health and Hospital System. They're screening patients for food insecurity. So when they go to the clinic as a part of the intake process, they're asked 2 questions that will determine whether or not they are food insecure. If they screen positive, they're referred to the Food Depository network of pantries. We have over 450 soup kitchens, shelters, and pantries that we partner with. The other interesting thing, which I think is the most innovative part, is we're actually bringing one of our trucks full of fresh produce. It's called the Fresh Truck. And we bring that to a clinic. So we're meeting the client where they are. So when an individual, instead of having to go to another pantry at another location, they can actually come to the clinic where they're being serviced by their doctor and pick up fresh produce. It's really amazing. And what we're complementing that with is nutrition education. So not only do they pick up the fresh produce, but they're getting a recipe on how to prepare squash or that kale. Some of our clients have never tasted kale before, so we're introducing them to new vegetables and providing all the ingredients. So it's really a wonderful thing.
So I'm a little bit confused here. Sure. Do you guys do the last mile stuff too? Do you actually hand the food to the people who are going to eat it, or do you partner with all these other organizations that actually distribute the food to the people?
And that's what we do. That's why this is just the beginning. The 50 fleet of trucks that we have, we deliver food to over 450 soup kitchens, pantries, and shelters across the city. And that's where the men, women, and children that we serve will show up to receive that bag of groceries. And you said that your sources of the food are donations, and some of it is purchased, and some of it is government. So you've got a whole mix of stuff. We have a whole mix.
I want to focus a little bit on the purchase, because that's money that people are giving you, right? You have
Absolutely.
members. I know. I've been one for a long time. So so you get my few bucks every year. Where does that money go? What does it buy?
It buys some of those. So we talked about those staples because we're really committed to offering families a balanced diet. So that idea of rice, pasta, vegetables, we supplement the donations that we receive. So we're receiving from corporations, from growers, farmers, but we sometimes don't know exactly what we're going to get. And we balance that mix out by going out and purchasing items that we know families need. We know it will provide them with the nutrition, so it really balances out the diet.
So you might get a call from somebody saying, "Hey, I've got 12,000 cans of pureed pumpkin or something,"
and we'll take it.
And it's getting close to expiration date. We're going to have to throw it out if we don't use it. So we're going to give it to you. And then you've got to figure out what to do with all that pureed pumpkin, and it's not even Thanksgiving.
Exactly. That's a great example of what will happen with our corporate donors or some of our grocery partners, but we do supplement that because peanut butter, the rice, the pasta, we know those are the staples that people need.
Yeah, and so you're always purchasing that kind of stuff.
Exactly, and we often have volunteers come in and help us sort through that. Actually, the area right there in the back is where we'll have groups of volunteers come in. So if we get a big load of beans, it's in a massive tubs. We just can't, the way that we get that to all of our partners in the community is we separate it out in small bags. So we'll have groups of volunteers come in and do that work, and that's invaluable. We can't pay for that. That's invaluable work. So we love the thousands of volunteers that come through in the food depository, and they come. They're donors. Sometimes they're recipients. The folks who stand in the pantry lines often come in and volunteer.
Yeah. I'm always reluctant to talk about numbers on television because, it's very hard to sort of conceive it. But I really want to go back to them a little bit. Can you give me sort of a broad overview of, you said the number already went through my head too, how many pounds of stuff goes through here?
70 million pounds.
See, the problem with that is that's just a number. I can't imagine what 70 million pounds is, but I mean, that's got to be a lot. If you could put it all in here at one time, I mean, it would be probably many, many times the size of this building.
And this building has a capacity to go about 80 million pounds.
Oh, okay. All right, good. All right. So this is how much you're pushing out into the community every year.
Yes.
And can you tell me a little bit about these you said there are 800,000 people, right?
800,000 people.
800,000
They're
people.
men.
And we're only talking in Cook County. I mean, I can't conceive of this to me.
They're men, women, and children. Some of them are veterans who have not been able to piece things together and have a job and meaningful employment. So to actually address that population, we have 2 pantries in veterans hospitals. So that's about meeting people where they are.
That's pretty shameful, but I'm glad you're doing it. Yeah,
it is, but it is a part of what we do. It's children. 20% of that 800,000 that we talked about are children facing hunger. So children who come to school hungry, they can't concentrate on doing their work in class and can't be attentive. They struggle to do their homework. And hunger is a distraction, and that is probably one of the things I just feel most passionate about. Is that's one thing a kid should never have to worry about, where their next meal is going to come from. We know that in school, kids can have access to lunch and breakfast, but when they're out of school, summer is one of the most vulnerable times for a kid because they're not in school. We don't know when they're going to get a meal. So one of the things that the Food Depository does is help connect kids to meals in the summer. So we provide meals and we partner with community organizations in the summer and bring meals to kids, prepared meals.
That is such an important point. And again, these are things that we're just not even thinking about. We all know that, the schools have a breakfast program, or there some kids get fed in school. But what about those times when they're not in school and their family situation hasn't changed just because it's summer?
Exactly. And one of the other most powerful tools that we have when we think about families, because we talked about the 2-parent household and they're working and they don't have enough to make ends meet. Sometimes what families can qualify for is something called SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistant Program. It's a federal program paid for by the government, and families that can be income eligible can get a SNAP card, or food stamps is what it's sometimes called, and they can go to the grocery store and be empowered to buy the food that they need. And that goes way further than even what we can provide in the food bank. So what we do as well is help enroll families in that program. And that's another key part of our strategy.
So how does, I'm still curious about your job, because it seems like you have really a fascinating job. I mean, you get to see a lot of
what the best part of my job is actually helping connect families to food and finding unique ways to do that. And one of the unique ways we talked about is having bringing our fresh truck to a health clinic, and that's where a family can access food. The other interesting thing we're doing is we're putting pantries. We have 30 pantries in Chicago public schools.
In the schools?
In the schools. So that's a way of that concept of meeting, families and communities where they are. And there's so they don't have to go another place. So teachers, parents, administrators, they all get together and they support the pantry and the operations. Because there are a lot of these pantries that I mentioned, all these partners across the city, a lot of them are volunteers. They have small budgets, if they have a budget at all. They have volunteers that show up and give their time. So that's so powerful. It's community helping community, which is one of the great things about Chicago.
So a parent who brings their kid to school can stop at the pantry on the way home and pick up some nutritious food.
Exactly.
That's a good thing too. I'm going to keep coming back to this point because I just don't believe that most people get this. And so we're going to say it many times until it settles in. 800,000 people would be a fairly large American city. I mean, you never do math live on television, but I'm thinking that's probably, isn't that about the size of maybe Cleveland or something? Is 800,000 people? I mean, they're just under 1 million, I think.
That's a good guess.
Apologies to Cleveland if I got that number wrong, but okay, let's look at Rockford. I mean, it's way bigger than the city of Rockford. Okay, let's stay in Illinois, okay? It's bigger than the city of Naperville. By far. You could probably put both of them together. That's how many people live in Cook County. Not in Illinois, in Cook County.
Right.
Who are food insecure, who do not have an adequate access to the food they need for their family at the end of their pay period.
That's correct.
What's wrong with us? You must know the answer to this. What's wrong with us? How can this be?
Well, what I do know, part of the challenge, again, is just families having meaningful employment and work and being able to support themselves and not having to make those hard choices between paying rent or paying for utilities or being able to get their medicine. So that's part of the challenge. I think part of the opportunity that we also play in the food depository is we have a workforce development food training program called Chicago Community Kitchens. So as much as we're committed to helping connect families to food, we're also committed to helping connect them to work. And this program is amazing. Hopefully if we have time, you can take a look at the kitchen. But it's a 12-week food training program. And when individuals graduate, we place them in a 2-week internship in the food industry. It could be at a grocery store, it could be at a restaurant, it could be at a catering company. And once they finish the internship, they're placed in permanent employment. We have a 90% placement rate and a 70% retention rate. And as a part of that program, individuals learn knife skills, food preparation, and food handling. The food that they're able to create is amazing. They learn how to make work all the commercial equipment in the kitchen. So it's really, we're addressing that skills gap that again puts people in meaningful work so that they don't have to make those hard choices about food. So I feel like in the food depository strategy, it begins in this warehouse and connecting people to food, but we don't want to do this forever. We want to put ourselves out of business. So that's part of the program. That's part of the process. And I think that's what, again, folks across Chicago and Cook County, that's what makes this work great, is how we're all coming together. So you're right, 800,000 people, food insecure, that's too many people, and that number has grown since we've been in business, and we want it to stop growing. And part of the solution will be community coming together, collaborating, and we see that when volunteers come through our doors and when donors like you contribute to the food depository.
Well, it's really interesting because we wanted to come here and do the show on location so that we can all see this in the background. But I think you would say, I'm putting words in your mouth, and I would agree with you if you said this, that the story isn't about this warehouse. It's not about this facility, because this facility exists because of the mega issues that are outside it, and it's out there, shoveling away, trying to do its part. But our program is a political program. We talk about politics, and I'm not going to drag you into the politics. But the solutions to these problems are political. And they are, so much of what we hear from from some of our current political leaders are things like poverty is the choice. You choose to be in poverty. If you wanted to work a little harder, you might be able to provide for your family. To which many people respond, yeah, I could work a little harder if maybe I could get that third job that pays $9 an hour, then maybe I could do a better job. This is not a question. This is just, I'm just ranting here, because being here, actually, at some level, I have this dual response. The first is how proud I am of what you're doing, and the other is how angry it makes me at the inability we have as a culture and a society to have already solved this problem.
Right, and I appreciate you venting and sharing that with your audience, because we want people to be angry about our neighbors facing hunger. We don't want to become complacent, and we shouldn't. Right, so thank you for doing that. And I think that there's a role that we can all step up. I hope that we channel that anger and frustration about what's happening in Chicago neighborhoods, because we're a tale of two cities. There's a lot that we love. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I'm a product of Chicago public school system. I love Chicago and the opportunity it has afforded me, and I want my neighbors to have that same opportunity. We just need to bridge the gap. And I think that's part of the role that the food depository is playing. The 450 soup kitchen, shelter, and pantry leaders, these community-based leaders who are volunteering their time to open a pantry, to serve people a hot meal. They're gearing up to do that right now for the Christmas holiday. It's all of those folks working together, the volunteers who come through our doors, the corporate donors who give us food and financial contributions, the individual donors. That's a movement, and I think if we can channel that anger and invite other people to become a part of this movement to end hunger in Chicago, we can do it.
Well, why don't you take advantage of CAN TV right now, and let's figure out how people can come here to volunteer, how people can donate. I don't know if that's all the same. If that's the same funnel, but we'll put it up on the screen.
Sure. chicagosfoodbank.org is our website. I would invite everyone to visit that website, and you can learn about volunteer opportunities. You can come by yourself. You can come with a group. As a volunteer, I'd invite the whole CAN TV team to come out and volunteer as a group. You can also volunteer in the community to see what that looks like, to see what a distribution looks like at a health clinic or a pantry or a soup kitchen, to really, because we serve our clients with dignity, and part of that is connecting with clients. At that same link, chicagosfoodbank.org, you can also make a financial contribution. For those of us who are busy and don't have the time, you can make that contribution to actually purchase some of those fresh foods that we need. The milk, the dairy items that a family needs, the protein, the rice and the beans. So those things we all purchase, and we need support for that as well. So, and the other thing I'd add is this time of year, in November, December, we have over 500 food drives, and anyone can start a food drive. So that's also a great way to volunteer. Start your own food drive or participate in the hundreds of food drives that are happening across the city.
Nicole, I'm just so glad that we were able to spend a few minutes here with you today, and I know you got to get back to work, but I have, as we were talking, I just have this image of the parts of Chicago where the giant food chains are competing with each other 3 or 4 blocks apart to build these emporiums that you walk into, and they're competing on how many varieties of cucumbers they can stock. And you can go 6 blocks from there, and there are people who wouldn't be able to access that food no matter what. So it's a good thing that there are some people who are trying to balance that out, and I'm proud to have been here with you today. Congratulations and good luck to you.
Thank you, and thank you for being a part of the solution.
All right. Well, there you go. There's Nicole. She works here at the Chicago Food Depository. Nicole Robinson, I'm very happy you invited us here today, and thank you for that. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom on remote from the Greater Chicago Food Depository warehouse down on the southwest side. And we'll be back in the new year with a bunch of new programs. We're going to start off on January 5th with a big blowout program about the news media, and I hope you'll be able to watch that one. And we're looking forward to a great new year, and I hope you are too. Happy 2017 to you from all of us here at CAN TV. And thanks, Chris and Carrie and Rob, for coming out here today and setting this up, and for all of the things that they've done for us on the show up to now. I'm Ken Davis. By the way, you can go to this address if you want to see our show at any time. And we'll see you next year. Bye.